Everyone. My name is Maisha Zareen. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the project coordinator at METRAC with the TransFormed project. Welcome to day 3, the final day of our symposium. We're really glad that you're here and joining us for this final part of the symposium. We have a lot of really important conversations and dialogues that are going on today that are specifically focusing on trans and non-binary intersections. So we are really thankful for all the service providers and community members that are here today. I have a couple of quick updates and messages I want to share with all of you, and then I will do a land acknowledgement, and then we'll introduce some of our guests from Center de Francophone, and then Laura, who is our program director, will lead you through some information about Zoom tutorials, our agenda, and an overview of what you can expect today. So the first thing I want to say is, as you can see at the top of the screen, it says, please update your Zoom to the latest version. So in order for you to accurately see our spotlighting and our guests on the screen, we really encourage you to take some time quickly to go update your Zoom and then join us to make sure you're seeing everything that we want you to see. As well, we have a quick update about our interpreting team. So one of our lovely interpreters, Kate, is here today, and unfortunately she is solo today. So we just want to share this with you so we have your understanding and support in Kate interpreting today. We are going to do our best on our end to pace moderately, but we just want to let you know that so you know that that's something that you can expect through the symposium today. Before I move on, I want to take time to thank everybody again who's been involved in this project. The Public Health Canada, City of Toronto, the Department of Justice, the Law Foundation of Ontario, Center de Francophone, of course, METRAC staff, everyone there who's been so important and critical in getting us to where we are today, our peer leadership group, and of course, our advisory committee. We wouldn't be here without everybody's team effort and feedback, so we are really thankful for everyone's support. I know this year has been very difficult for so many of us. We have a pandemic going on. On top of that, it's affected so many people with different intersections in so many different ways. We've seen an increase of anti-Blackness, transphobia. I mentioned yesterday that we had Trans Awareness Week in TDOR last week, but for many of you who are two-spirit, non-binary, and trans, TDOR and Trans Awareness Week, that's every day of your life. So I'm really thankful that you're here trying to learn from us and figure out how to better support your peers and community. And I also am thankful for folks outside of the community who are here and committed and dedicated to better serving your community through the knowledge and the information that we share. So thank you so much. We are talking about violence today, so I just want to let you know if you at any time during our sessions need to step back or away and then come back later, please feel free to do that and do whatever you need to do to soothe yourself. Even though you come into a space knowing that we will be talking about violence, I know at any point some of the more specific details that we talk about might be very triggering or hard. So please take time to do whatever you need to do before you come back. These webinars are being recorded, so they will be available on our webpage soon. We have note takers who are taking notes, so you'll have different ways to access the information later on. So I just want to mention that as well. METRAC's board of directors and staff are committed to upholding the spirit and intent of the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations and call to action. To this end, at the beginning of all METRAC meetings, we make a statement through which we hope to raise awareness, understanding, and respect for the traditional Indigenous territories of Ontario. We recognize that Indigenous territories on which our organization is located and on which our programs and trainings take place. We also recognize the failure of settlers to uphold Indigenous sovereignty of this land, and so we commit to decolonize our organization and bring this history to light. For thousands of years, this land has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Haudenosaunee, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by Upper Canada treaties. Today, the meeting place of Toronto, as in the Haudenosaunee word Takaranto, is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. We wish to express our gratitude to Mother Earth and for the resources that we are using, and honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit who have been living on this land. We are aware that our settler acknowledgement uses different language that might be used by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, but we also understand that language is fluid and living, and we respect that diversity. We are aware that not all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit refer to themselves in the same way, so some may refer to themselves in spiritual or religious contexts, while some may use regional names. I now want to take time to introduce Maulud from Center Francophone, who is one of our partners. He's going to introduce himself a little bit and have a couple of words to say to you.
Thank you, Maisha. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maulud, and I've been part of the project for the third year, and I'm gonna just introduce the project in French because I think it's important for the French community. Donc, le projet TransFormed est un projet qui a été conçu par METRAC en anglais et puis traduit en français par le Centre francophone du Grand Toronto avec un partenariat entre les deux organismes. Ensemble, nous avons recherché auprès des communautés francophones et anglophones et francophiles pour comprendre comment la violence familiale et la violence conjugale sont vécues par les membres de la communauté trans de la région du Grand Toronto. D'une façon qui répond aux besoins en matière de sécurité et de confidentialité, bien sûr, et qui tient compte au traumatisme. Répondre aussi aux besoins des membres de la communauté trans diversifiée par le biais d'interventions menées par les pairs et d'activités de renforcement de capacités d'auprès des prestataires de services. Pardon. Donc, that was all. I introduced it in, I hope there is some French crowd who understands me. And I'll be available here to answer all your questions and to support the project. Thank you very much, Maisha.
Thank you so much, Maulud. Yeah, if you have any questions specifically for him, please feel free to type it in the chat, or directly you can message a panelist as well. So that those both options are available to you. I'm going to now bring Laura Hartley forward, who's the program director at METRAC. She's going to talk a little bit about the project, about METRAC, and then give you some information on how to access certain things on Zoom.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Hartley, she, her pronouns. And like Maisha said, I'm the program director at METRAC, and I've had the privilege of supporting and working with the TransFormed project since March. Welcome to folks who are joining us just for the first time today, and welcome to folks who have been here for the past couple of days. I'm just going to give just a general kind of introduction to METRAC and the project first. So METRAC was founded in 1984. We're a not-for-profit agency based in Toronto. Historically, we were dedicated to advancing safety, justice, and equity for women and youth. But with the introduction and creation of the TransFormed project, we've expanded our inclusivity efforts by putting time, energy, and research into understanding the experience of intimate partner violence within Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. So the TransFormed project, as Maulud introduced, it's a bilingual, community-based research and action initiative led by METRAC in partnership with Centre Francophone. And we're very grateful to all of our funders for their generous support that has made the project possible. So we'd like to really thank Public Health Agency of Canada, the City of Toronto, the Department of Justice, and the Law Foundation of Ontario. And over the past 3 years, TransFormed has been engaged in community-based participatory research and education with the goal of addressing barriers and increasing access to health and social supports for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans people affected by intimate partner violence. And so I would like to just share a few things about technical things about Zoom just to support everyone with accessing today's symposium. So as participants, you should see along the bottom of your screen 3 buttons. And there's 2 main ones that we're going to be using today. There's the chat button. And so with that feature, you can talk to your fellow attendees. You can message the panelists. So that's great for sort of conversation or comments. And then we have the Q&A button. And we're going to ask if you have questions, which we really encourage you to ask your questions. Please put them in the Q&A button. That way it's easy for us on our end to keep track of the questions. And some of them we may be able to answer through like typing our answers, but some we can also answer out loud. And the other thing is that right now you can see that Maisha is sharing a PowerPoint, and you should see the speakers as small boxes to the side, and you can actually take your cursor and you can move to control how big or small you want the PowerPoint versus the people's faces. So if you need our faces to be bigger, you can slide your cursor along to help do that. And if you're having any technical issues, you can send a message in the chat box and we'll do our best to help you. And as Maisha shared, I just want to take a moment before we move into our panel discussions. Just for those of you who are here for the first time today, I want to show you how you can access some of the amazing resources that the TransFormed project has created. So Maisha is just going to be amazing and pull up METRAC's website for us. And so to view and to access the TransFormed resources, you're just going to go to metrac.org. And don't worry, I'll put that in the chat bar after. And when you get to the METRAC website, there's a banner and you're going to click on what we do. And then you'll see a drop-down menu and you'll see the TransFormed project. If you click on that, it will bring you to the TransFormed projects page. As you scroll down, you'll see information about the project. And then what I wanted to highlight was just the health promotion tools and resources that we have available. So we have a comprehensive glossary of terms, which is an excellent guide to terminology that we'll be using in our presentation today, but also that is really useful in working with Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary communities. We have End the Silence on Intimate Partner Violence, which is a brochure of support services that are available for Two-Spirit, trans, and non-binary folks who've experienced violence. We have the Healthy and Unhealthy Intimate Relationships, and that is a resource that was designed specifically for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans community members with information on what intimate partner violence can particularly look like in the community. It explores the signs of a healthy relationship. It talks about coping and how to get support. And we also have Preventing Intimate Partner Violence in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities. And that resource was designed specifically to support service providers in understanding how intimate partner violence can particularly manifest in Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans communities, understanding the signs of intimate partner violence, and really importantly, the work that can be done to decrease barriers, increase access, and more affirming and supportive services for Two-Spirit, non-binary, and trans folks. And just 2 more things. We also have a legal resource that we just launched, which is giving legal information on making gender and name changes on identity documents. And then finally, we also have a research document, which it goes over the quantitative and qualitative research that was done as part of the TransFormed project. So there's lots of, in addition to the amazing conversations that are going to happen today, there's lots of information for you to access on the TransFormed webpage.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, and all those files are up on the webpage for you to download for yourself and to bring back to your organizations. So we really highly recommend that you take the time to look through all of them because they will really support you and your organization in increasing your capacity to better serve the communities that we're talking about today. So before we get into our first session for the day, we're just going to take a quick 2-minute, 1-minute break just to set our things up and to support our incredible interpreter who's here today. Just took a look at the comments about the resources and kudos to the graphic designer. Yes, our graphic designer, Manar Hussein, did an incredible job on all the resources, designing the web page. So, you know, big shout out to them for their incredible skill and work and incredible team effort in working with us. I'm just taking a quick minute to pull up some of our slides. Zoom is being a little bit slow with me, but thank you for your patience. Okay, so the first session that we are starting today off with is taking a look at trans and non-binary intersections, but specifically perspectives from our participants on the different things that they really wanted to mention to us. So in front of you, you'll see that I have 2 key themes up that I kind of want us to keep in mind as I am talking about some of the direct quotes and the direct recommendations or suggestions that participants gave. So the first one is failure of service groups and agencies in serving trans and non-binary people. And the second one is peer-led models and peer-led community environments, plus the impact that they can have. So I'm going to take a bit of time to go over some of our qualitative data, and then I will introduce Burkha Gupta, who is the executive director at LGBT Youthline, to speak a little bit about their perspective on this and some of their data. And I'll also introduce Felix Kane and Susan Gapka, who are peer leadership group members on our peer leadership team, to talk about their perspectives as well and maybe give some perspective on our data and perhaps on the LGBT Youthline data as well. So when we're keeping in mind those 2 themes, the first thing that I really want to talk about is what participants said about when they're accessing cisgender therapists, psychiatrists, or certain 2S LGBTQ spaces. The big thing that we noticed in the data and from the focus groups is that a lot of folks said that they're really having to negotiate their identity when they are entering these spaces. So essentially that means like leaving their identities at the door and not being able to fully bring all parts of themselves in, which is really damaging to them because they should be focused on getting support and not on having to worry that, you know, they're going to be discriminated against or that the different facets or intersections of their identities aren't going to be fully addressed in the disclosure of their abuse or the situation that they're in. So some of the things that folks mentioned were that service providers have a lack of knowledge about trans dating and relationship dynamics, and there are limited physicians that can support them who focus specifically on trans health. So a lot of these things are leading to discrimination and violence in spaces like women's shelters, misgendering and disregarding of trans identities when people are trying to seek help in mental health spaces or specifically in medical settings. Some of our deaf participants mentioned that there's limited access to interpreters for deaf people and a lack of support when they're seeking help for crises. So already that is a big lack in that intersection. There are a lack of supports for trans and non-binary folks who can't access services because of their immigration status. So if folks are without immigration or refugee status, they're already feeling, you know, isolated and not supported and represented in those spaces. So where do those folks go when they need support? Lack of safety planning information and resources for trans women of color. So keeping in mind peer representation and peer community environments, I want to talk about the need for representation in staff as well that folks really talked about. Firstly, a lot of people said that there is a lack of affordable therapists that have either lived experience or professional experience working with trans identities. Some direct quotes that I remember are people saying, people look at me like I'm from outer space when I come forward and talk about my experiences and when I disclose my abuse. People who have never been in my position. So for example, incarcerated people, homelessness, people who haven't experienced poverty, they don't understand, you know, if you haven't been through those situations and you're in these staff positions, it's really hard for you to understand what community members have been through. So they're really seeking support with staff who have those lived experiences and therefore can provide better services in that way. Stemming off of that, I want to get into the need for nuances. So what I'm going to be going over in the next 2 minutes are really direct quotes. So one person said, when seeking supports and counseling, discussing healthy or unhealthy relationships is confusing because I am making choices to not be alone. And part of not being alone is being in relationships that someone else might see as healthy or unhealthy, but I accept it. So when I sought out supports or spoke to people about the abuse, I felt judged, as though I need to choose between relationships and feeling isolated. So this is taking me back to the point of, you know, it's already so hard to get people to disclose the things that they're going through, to have them come forward and speak up. So when they're in these spaces, the last thing that they need is to feel judged. You know, they're there to get crisis support and to get assistance on what they're going through. They don't need to be worrying about, you know, are the staff who are treating me and, you know, listening to me going to judge me on the decisions that I made? Someone else said specifically about relationship dynamics. So this is taking us to, you know, those knowledge gaps that we're also really trying to fill with the resources we provide. They said, not knowing where to go for polyamorous relationship support is really hurtful. How do I find supports if I've been in an abusive poly relationship? What if I've been in an abusive poly relationship with other trans or non-binary people? A lot of domestic violence supports, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, or mental, have this discourse and dynamic that there's a man abusing me or someone of a masculine figure. So when you don't fit that mold and I say, you know, my abuser did this, people assume that it's a guy, and that's not how it works. So not having support in knowing those different relationship dynamics that exist in the community is a huge barrier for people. And we do try to address that in our specific resource for service providers, so you can get a thorough understanding of how a lot of dating and relationship dynamics work. In terms of scarcity, this quote that I'm going to say now really stood out to us. It really stood out to me, because I know community members are talking and thinking about it a lot. So we were really thankful that in our focus group, someone came forward and mentioned this. They said, see, the problem is that they're not working together. So they're referring to community agencies. One agency is trying to be better than the other. I want my ground. One week, this person's got that project, then the next week, the next one has it. It's the same project. We're supposed to be people of unity, not divide and conquer. You're defeating the purpose. All you are saying is it's just for your agency, and it's unfortunate because they could join as one and have strength to support each other. Not one is better than the other. They need some sort of compromising and merging because they're all just so worried about their own grants. I think as for us as service providers and coordinators, whatever position you might be in, we already know this. This is a true reality, but it is a very painful thing to hear back from community members because, again, there's so many things that are going on in their lives. There was a suggestion brought up about programming specifically. You know, programs are often really short and they don't have continuations. So there's a lot of short programming that's popping up rather than maybe people joining together and having longer term things that people can access. In our webinar later today and in some of our resources, we really tried to encourage service providers, agencies, and organizations to try out open sharing and really collaborate and connect with other agencies, who are working in the same kind of project or specific field as them, because I really believe, and you can see that community members are saying this too, that solidarity is so much better than us being isolated and then not being able to properly support everybody. So for example, our symposium, we had an advisory committee with almost 20 organizations. Everyone served and gave feedback in different capacities. We wanted to make sure that some of them were able to come here during the symposium and talk, because we love and support and believe in our resources, but we also know so many other organizations are doing incredible work in this field, and we wanted to share that during this space as well. So we're really trying to lead by example in that way. In terms of specifically from the deaf community, we had a lot of information from them. Someone said, we're in a situation now where we have better technology and better webcams. The deaf community should be working towards more counseling on webcams. We want to be able to have access to accessible counseling. There are people who can pick up a phone and call a hotline. We have nothing that's an equivalent service to our first language. And needing support in different stages of stability and instability, when you're surviving, but when you're also thriving. So we know that folks are never in one place. They're always moving around in terms of the support that they need. And we heard from community members that they find that once they're moving around from different stages of the struggles that they're in, that there may not be really fluid, connected supports. So if someone is surviving, but they're starting to do a little bit better, where are the full supports for that? If someone was thriving, but they suddenly need different kinds of supports, they want to be connected to different facets of that. Maulud mentioned earlier, this is a bilingual project, so it was really important for us to hear from the Francophone focus group. I have 3 specific quotes that I wanted to sit with and share with you. The first one is, LGBTQ services in French are very limited, and services for special needs people is non-existent. Someone said, I have never managed to find services that could meet my whole personal needs as a trans French speaker. This next one really stood out to us, and it's taking us back to the negotiation of identities. So the quote is, we're either French speaking, homosexual, or trans. So this community member was specifically talking about how they can never really take all parts of their identity and get support in that way. When they are trying to get support for abuse, they can't find a place that will support all parts of who they are. They have to either be French speaking and then leave behind the other parts of their identity, or they can say that they're gay, but they're having trouble in the space saying that they're trans and talking about their gender identity. But if they're only talking about their gender identity, suddenly there isn't a space where they can also access someone who can speak French with them in their first language. We have folks who were, French, like native speakers from here. We have folks coming from different places, as you'll see in the next quote. Someone said, to find medical care in French is already a challenge. Finding someone who is welcoming to support you being a trans person, respecting your pronoun or respecting your name, or if it was considering medical interventions, was already a lot to consider. In Toronto, I'm not aware of someone who's able to offer support that is tailored to my need from my point of view of my LGBTQ identity, my gender identity, sexual orientation, but also someone who can exchange in my language. I'm not from Toronto. I arrived recently. I have no family supports. It adds extra stress and difficulties. So thinking about this and keeping it in mind and seeing that French community members are really struggling to find a place where they can access the full range of supports that they need with all the duality and the nuances in mind of their language, their sexual orientation, and their gender. Just to finish off my piece, I wanted to mention, before we move on to our guests, some additional barriers that I didn't want to leave this without mentioning them. Folks told us that when they were seeking help from police, a very specific situation, a participant said that they were misgendered, which then triggered them due to their history of trauma. And then suddenly, in this situation where they were in a crisis and they needed support, they were being charged with assault of a police officer due to the triggers that came from their past traumas. Older folks are saying, they're having barriers finding drop-ins of different ages. So those over ages of 80 and over 45, or over 30, but also 45. One of the bigger issues was experienced long wait times of up to 4 years. Folks are saying the forms are outdated when they're trying to access support and they have to fill out information. forms are hard to use. They're not helpful. They don't understand the questions. So maybe the questions are outdated. And finally, someone said, why aren't there LGBTQ shelters for adults that they know of that are safe for them? They said, I know of LGBTQ shelters and spaces for youth, but as an adult who's over the age of 30, I don't know where to go. So as you keep these experiences and direct quotes that I said in mind, I want to now invite Burka from LGBT Youthline to kind of speak on their perspective of the two themes that I have up here, but also to speak to some of the data from LGBT Youthline that they feel might be important to mention alongside ours for a couple of minutes here.
Thanks everyone for having me. Kate, did you want a bit of a break? Okay. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research we recently did, while not specific to intimate partner violence, but is related to 2S LGBTQ youth. So last year we embarked on needs assessments across Ontario, asking 2S LGBTQ youth what their needs and experiences were. It was an entirely youth-led process, and from the development to the compilation of the data. And over the research, we had almost 1,200 youth respond in a combination of surveys and focus groups. I know today the group is talking primarily around GTA. A large percentage of our data is from the GTA. And what we also found was that trends, while there was a lot more disparity in Northern Ontario, trends across experiences of mental health didn't change drastically. I specifically pulled out some data for trans youth because that's the population we're talking of today, and wanted to name that when we asked the question of whether youth mental health needs were being met, 40% said that their needs were not being met. On top of this, when we asked them for a sense of community, 4.5 out of 10 is the rating they gave about whether they felt a sense of community in their local areas. These two pieces alone also speak to a lot of the pieces that Maisha brought up around the sense of isolation that 2S LGBTQ youth in general, but especially trans youth feel in terms of the relationships they have and the safety they feel in their communities. And also wanting to name that like trans youth was the lowest sense of community being felt, as well as the highest percentage for mental health needs not being met. A quote that I pulled out, which I also wanted to name that all of these research reports, the snapshots are available on our website at youthline.ca/publications. We have one summary report, and we actually did 5 snapshots for specific communities. Most of the data I'm covering today is coming from our trans community snapshot reports, and then me doing a deeper dive into our data as well. One of the quotes I have is that from a trans person is that I'm tired of feeling unsafe and abandoned. And this is a theme we saw throughout. Our survey was more focused on qualitative questions because we really wanted to give youth space to give us open-ended answers and to give us dreaming answers as well. And what we found is that a lot of the youth, one of the questions we asked was, what would you tell people in positions of power? The themes of those answers either ranged from rage and a lot of anger, or they were about youth really just actually wanting to have basic human decency. The data was extremely hard to read because folks, like when we ask them to dream, their dreaming is about wanting to be able to have basic access and to be able to walk on a street without feeling like they're going to face discrimination. Related to this, we also asked a question about what they loved about being part of our community. And same thing, we saw a lot of theme of folks feeling like they didn't know what they could love because they were struggling so much. Speaking to some of the themes around failure of service groups and peer-led models, we asked youth what are the ways that they access supports for mental health, and self-care and talking to friends and peer were the top 2 ways that folks have been accessing services. What this said to us, and it was a drastic difference, it was like 50 to 60% of them said they used these 2, and then the other options were used. And what it says to us is that youth are actually finding ways in their own communities and their own networks to meet their needs. It doesn't mean that their needs are being met or that is sufficient for them, but they don't actually trust external and formal spaces to access supports. Maisha already talked about this. This also came up in our surveys, that the most important factors for folks accessing service is staff knowledge of LGBTQ issues and trans identities, and whether they're going to have to do the education work or whether they could come into a space and feel like they're not going to face experience further discrimination and barriers. And then also the presence of LGBTQ staff felt really important to youth. And then another thing that showed up in our data was that when we asked youth how they found out about services or trusted services, they said word of mouth is actually the only way they really trust services. And for trans community members, we knew this too often, that a rainbow sticker or pieces don't necessarily mean that trans inclusion or trans safety is guaranteed. And so actually word of mouth is one of the only ways that community members are able to understand where they can go to get a positive experience, or which specific clinician to talk to, which VAW service is gonna not is going to be accepting of a trans person calling their lines, or what that experience is going to look like. That's a little bit about the data. Oh, one more piece I wanted to name, because Maisha named this, is that when we asked about what are the things people looked for in a service, and their top 3 choices, police presence came up in the top 3 choices around what they needed to have. Is the lack of police presence was an important factor in them using a service. And this was highest for trans people as well. And this was in 3rd place after it being free or low cost and close to them. So I think that also says a lot to the experience of crisis response for trans communities, and the fear of what it looks like when police or CAS or systems are involved in contexts of violence or other crisis. I had a lot of notes. I'm just like, what else do I need to tell you? I also just wanted to name some more things around the layers of unsafety. And so I think that this piece about failure of service groups and agencies, like, it cannot hit home more. The gender-based violence sector in general, and when it comes to service providers in general across the board, have been failing trans people forever, and trans people don't believe that there is space for them, especially trans youth. When you add layers of body dysphoria, unsafety, worries about acceptance, as service providers, we need to work much harder to understand how trans communities have additional layers that allow them to access spaces, and how they think about intimate partner relationships. When we add the layers of employment and housing precarity, even the most recent data for TransPulse had said that the average trans person makes, I believe, less than $15,000 a year. There's all of these added layers that it's not easy to just be like, well, just move out or just do something else. Trans people also are used to not feeling like they're like beautiful or that they'll be accepted. And so there's additional layers. And then when you actually add someone being a person of color or having a disability, there's additional layers that make people stay in relationships much longer. And also that the relationship that they're in might be the most healthiest relationship they've been in. So we really need to think of a harm reduction model when it comes to helping communities and especially trans youth, around intimate partner violence, because the dichotomy of like what is healthy and what isn't unhealthy, or telling them that something is wrong, doesn't work. This is also why organizations like ours that run a helpline that's peer-led, and all of the model is around youth autonomy, is a preference place for folks. A lot of youth do contact us around sexual violence and abuse, because we specifically make sure that we're not telling them what to do, but we help them with their options. And this is also really important because when you talk to youth who are minors, there's a lot of complexities in what comes into play when someone is a minor, or someone might be in their earlier 20s, and what their understandings of relationships or access can look like. Yeah. Also understanding needs of transitional support and articulation of trauma also can look different. I think Maisha covered a lot of that in the data, so I won't go into it a lot. But these layers become a lot more complex because intimate partner violence might not be seen as such an immediate threat when you're experiencing direct violence in other ways around your identity every single day. I think I will leave it at that because I'm hoping we'll have some discussions later.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to just say before I introduce Felix to speak a little bit, you're absolutely right that the layers of complexity when, you know, speaking to minors is it's already so scary for them. And then I think it's great that your model is providing the support to them where they're able to brainstorm and talk to somebody about their options. It's exactly what you said about police systems, CAS, social work systems. I I've heard that the biggest fear is when I already have this instability from the layers of trauma and violence from my gender and from intimate partner violence, if I'm coming forward to now speak up about it, am I creating an even bigger problem for myself and creating even more instability? Because I feel like that keeps so many youth away from speaking up or speaking out about what they're going through, that fear of, am I walking into something even worse?
And then the one other thing I'll say is, like you said that, I was actually just talking about this recently with someone, is that like for a lot of trans community members, we have experiences of experiencing a lot of unhealthy relationships from our families and from the people who are supposed to keep us the safest. So when you put that in context, and it's very hard to understand when you haven't gone through it, but when you have no frame of reference of what safety looks like, and that the people in the world that are supposed to keep you the safest, the concept of a healthy relationship looks very different. And so I think for a lot of trans folks also, like it's harder to identify that you might be in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. And a service provider saying, oh, that's unhealthy, is not actually going to be helpful immediately. And that layer is just so complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring Felix King forward now. Felix, do you want to speak for a few minutes about any like thoughts or perspectives you have on the themes or anything that I've said or Berka has said?
Yeah, it's a lot. I'm just thinking back to what was said about shelters. So recently I was the project coordinator of for the Toronto Shelter Network, and we did a survey involving, or we did several surveys, and really explored into service provision for trans, non-binary, two-spirit, and otherwise gender diverse populations who are accessing shelters. And the results were similar. A lot of people were also calling for more connections to transformative and restorative justice approaches as opposed to the police. And similar experiences of having the police called on them and having it be incredibly unsafe. There seem to be intersections of like autism as well, and neurodivergence, and how people were hyper-policed. And I did want to also talk about the desire for service providers, more service providers that reflect the intersections of the community. That's all well and good, and I also fully back that, but I would advise to be cautious, because when we bring people on, we often do it in a very irresponsible way, in a very extractive and an exploiting kind of way, where we just kind of hire this disenfranchised trans person and say, hey, you're in charge of educating everyone, and we're not going to pay you extra. We're actually going to pay you less than everyone else. Don't complain or you'll be fired. And in the study, when I was talking with some service providers, that did happen. People did set those boundaries and were fired for saying, no, I don't want to explain my body parts to you. That's weird. And also calling HR. But gender diverse people often don't have that privilege when they're put in that situation of us being able to assert those boundaries without consequence. So I think it's very important to go about this in an ethical way and not just hire people on like frontline work, the lowest kind of rungs. Like, no, involve them in the higher ups as well. I want to see disabled people, trans people, people of color, people with multiple intersections at every single layer, and being involved in those decisions for the organizations. So yeah, I wanted to add that.
Yeah, you know what that's making me think of is two things very quickly before I bring Susan in. One thing is to really encourage people from our communities to be in higher up positions and leadership positions. And when we have like models where we're working with people, for example, peer groups and things like that, to explain how different positions of leadership work, so that we're encouraging people to say, you can achieve all of this, you can get into these higher positions of leadership and make this kind of impact. Because I think a lack of knowledge on how to get to these positions for so many people is a big barrier that keeps them away from even considering or pursuing that. And to the point that you said about exploiting workers, I agree. I think a lot of work in some organizations is put onto one person or two people to educate their entire staff and lead these projects. I also wonder what happens when those folks are transitioning out. What happens to all that information and that work that they did? How is that then still continuously like spread throughout the organization at different levels? But then what happens to the next person that comes in and has to then be in that position again?
I'm also gonna, oh, sorry.
No,
I also just wanted to add a quick thing.
Yeah.
Often with the peer, like people in peer positions,
Yeah.
it's very isolating, because if you're a trans person serving your community, often in the same age groups, you can't date people. Like you can't date someone who might be a client. You can't like talk to someone, like maybe your ex will come in as a client. It's like, whoa, I've had that happen. It's weird.
Yeah.
So there needs to be more consideration for mental health supports. Like, is your peer worker able to access therapy? Is therapy being covered under benefits? Are they even getting benefits? These things really need to be factored in, or else you're going to isolate people and really do damage to that peer's mental health.
Yeah, looking at the capacity, like a peer worker's capacity through all the work that they have to do and the trauma that they have to, not just their own, but other people's as they're working, is such a huge thing. And, like burnout is such a common, huge thing in the community at different levels. The things that burnout does, oh gosh. Susan, I want to invite you in now. Like, do you, if you have any perspectives on the themes, or if anything, you want to speak to anything specifically, I would really love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. I have to come off mute. Words for 2020.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maisha and Burka, for outlining some of the peer-led research, and Felix for giving some comments on thoughts. I made some notes, and it's going to be impossible. This could be a dissertation, or responding could be a dissertation or a thesis in some ways. And what's exciting is that people will be doing that nowadays. That space wasn't available 20 years ago. What came up for me, and I'm going to do my trans elder thing here, that I came out as yesterday as an elder, because you've got to have a spot somewhere. And just how that does create space for someone like myself. Trans people, transsexual, transgender people have been organizing outside of societies, in the back alleys and in the street corners since the beginning of time. We've been outcasts. Vivian Namaste wrote a chapter for CL Grow called Access Denied, which talked about that, how we revolve our world access to health outside of social services, outside of healthcare services. And she put it into a book which became an award-winning Invisible Lives, the Lives of Transsexual and Transgender People. And that was, I forget the name of the group. She got an award, a major gay lesbian group, that in 1999. So that was a lot of my mentorship. I'm thinking of so many things and looking at this clock winding down in front of me. But some of the comments that come out, I think one thing that I've learned, and we talked about it in webinar 1 about boundaries and about intersectionality, and how some people, you have to decide what you're bringing. Is that your language? Is that your race? Just want to identify that as a white European ancestry, Canadian citizen. I have a lot of benefits that others that are in our research do not. I also have had my challenges of being a homeless person and being long-term recovery around mental health and addictions, etc. And which brings me to the topic. And our communities are so broad and diverse. Just look at the title, Two-Spirit, non-binary, trans. And trans is such an umbrella term that means so many different things, geographically, personally. And as I said yesterday, is like identity is, for me, it's less so now, but so intense, so meaningful, and so important. And how do service providers work with all of that? I guess I'm on a bit of a rant now. I'm on the roll. I could not rant, and people who have been disadvantaged, like myself, around violence and violence by authorities. Heard no police, no police presence, and I think that's a theme that comes up pretty strongly. As trans people, we've been marginalized so terribly over the years that our trauma is produced and reproduced. And that makes it really hard to interact with services that are trying to support us. And so that's why it's really important that the providers are here today to do some learnings, and we can teach and learn from each other, I believe. I want to also add comments from the TransFormed project around funding timelines, and some of the quotes you used, Maisha, that was my early experience working with a group called Fred Victor, doing a street outreach. We did a play, but unfortunately timing, it was called HAT. It was a harm reduction group, Street People's Theater, we called it. And it's like, but then that beginning and end closes, and then the people that are told as peers, this is a bit of a peer, dissecting the peer model, is what happens is you are so valued and important, but the project has ended and now go find your own way. And so I think in a way that's a bit of that's a huge challenge. It's best that community groups like METRAC and Youth Line and other groups are best to lead these, even if they're funded by the city or the province or the federal government, as this project was. But finding ways for those are not just one-off projects. Some of us are resilient, and we're going to talk about, we keep coming back for more, but there's so much good, I guess I could say, talent, energy, and spirit that can get pushed aside, left aside if they don't have, and this is my last point here, and I'm going to check my time, coming up to 7 minutes. I got 2 main points left, but the pre and post access, we need wraparound comprehensive services. You can't do that with a singular funding model, but this happens in mental health. The pre, you got to do some work around building those relationships. Then there's the interventions, whatever happens, and then follow-up, comprehensive follow-up. And what people need is decent housing, food in the fridge, all of those social determinants of health. Otherwise, I think it's lacking if we don't provide the necessities of life while we're inviting people in. I had another point and it is just evaporated. It was really important. But the peer-led models, yes, just on lived experience, peer-led can be an advantage and a disadvantage, because we need to look at the person as the whole person. And we're all lived experience. We're still walking and talking and ASL interpreting, and which experience is that? Which one are we disclosing at this particular moment in time? And what makes you a manager or a peer or a staff and all of that stuff. And I think some of that really needs to be unpacked. And there's some really good peer-led models out there. And I think but they're not all the same. There can be some very different, some top down, some bottom up peer-led models, and those need to be examined. And there's your thesis for you. I'm at 8 minutes. I'm going to turn it over for questions. Thank you for listening. Miigwech and power to everyone here on the videos and everyone listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I think as we think about those, like the final points you made, I want to give Kate a break just for a minute or two before we continue the discussion or look at some questions, because I see like there's a lot of comments popping up as we were talking. All right, so we have a couple of minutes left. I'm just gonna check to see if there are any specific questions that people have for us, and if not, you know, if we have some like final discussion points, especially Susan, you said so much, especially about wrapping around projects with peers and what happens when projects are done. How do we keep people still engaged, and how do we keep like a, I guess, a continuation of care model going on where we don't just have people exit and that's that, and they have to find another project or program, because that is something that participants mentioned specifically about you know, length of things and like coming back to things. Looks like I may have to stop sharing to access the Q&A.
Yes, there's a question for you, Maisha, in the questions. And I think another one.
Yes.
Oh, someone. Oh,
Oh, yes, yeah. So one question that someone is asking is, what can we do as someone who does not have a say on hiring practices, not on the hiring committee? I don't see who applies to positions at our center, but everyone here is white, able-bodied, cisgender. How can I help our center?
I guess I can try to take a stab at that. I feel like it really depends on the context, size of organization, what it looks like. So it's like when you say everyone is white, cisgendered, and whatnot, I'm just like, I think my instinct is to be like, the agency probably has a very long way to go before it can start really meaningfully thinking about trans inclusion at the staffing level. And so I guess the questions I would ask is that, are there ways that you feel like you have moments of power where you can ask for potential movements towards the creation of working groups or committees, or ways to get feedback? Does your organization do any types of staff assessments? Like some larger organizations every so often will get like anonymous feedback from staff. Do you have people within your organization that you do trust, that you think could be change makers, who maybe are in a more like position of power? Because these things can be really complicated, like Felix said, that like it can often lead to like firings and whatnot. So it's a hard question to answer. I know for me, when I've been in organizations, like a lot of organizations will allow staff members to sit on committees sometimes and whatnot. And in those positions, I've tried really hard to find ways where I can strategically say things that will help like give more priority to lived experience and not just the like beautiful words that someone is saying around anti-oppression. And so like sometimes it can look like baby steps. And I guess what I would add to that too is that we're also in a moment right now where there's like a lot of heightened nervousness around what it means to be an organization who is not thinking about anti-oppression and inclusion, if I were using the word inclusion, because it's possible this org needs to actually think about that. And so is there ways that you can leverage that and potentially, unfortunately, use fear to get pieces moving? It's not the ideal situation, but like it's like, where can you find the power to kind of make movements happen? And I think lots of members on the committee have also said that it's like bringing in a person of color or a trans person is not going to solve anything. It actually is going to cause a lot of harm for that person. And so it's like there's a lot of steps that probably need to happen before that, oh, look, we hired our first person.
Yeah, I just want to echo that and add on. I completely agree. I think it really depends on the context of the full organization, also what position you're in and how safe you feel talking about certain things. Even something that came to mind is like taking resources that you like and forwarding them to people, because organizations do have like equity departments, but even that is something to carefully consider. You know, can you feel safe enough to forward these materials? If you're telling a staff member that you trust that I came across this and I think we should look at this, or you should read this, or you should bring this up at the next bigger staff meeting, I think those are really good small baby steps, like you said, to take, and to, I would say, to not feel, you know, discouraged or overwhelmed that you can't do huge steps right away, because these small steps are where a lot of things really started.
I would piggyback onto that with adding, gauge your workplace. Gauge the potential allies in the room when your boss is not around, and unionize if possible. Like, are you part of a union? I'm going to be that person. Are you part of a union? Do you have connections to a union? Are people similarly minded? Because if you're one person bringing it to your boss saying, hey, there's this problem, they're going to be like, that's nice, bye. if it's the whole team, that's going to be a different story, because it's going to be much higher to rehire all of you. So
Also,
sometimes you got to take that approach.
Union. Like the right union that will work for you.
Something that just came to mind is, I think maybe sometimes we're in positions where we have to get a little bit creative in how we forward or present or like give materials to people. I was in a position once where I couldn't really, I wanted to say something about gender identity at the workplace, but I couldn't really email people or anything like the way that I suggested. So I did a funny thing where, obviously I don't recommend everyone to do this, but I'm just being honest. I did a funny thing where I printed out materials and I just kind of left them lying around in places. But I was like, somebody's gonna see this. Oops, where did it come from? I don't know, but there it is. Yeah, just might have to get a little bit creative sometimes. Susan, I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add on to this, because I know there was also a question that was specifically for you.
I was asked a question and I typed it in, and I don't know who can see it because I'm learning the technology as well, but there is a future directions chance to respond to that. So I really wanted to talk about different recruitment methods. There's different ways and I've worked with a couple different models, and I'm hoping to talk about that in the next segment.
Okay, no problem. I guess as we're wrapping this up, Berka, Felix, Susan, did you have anything you wanted to let people know about?
Yeah, I think the one thing that came up for me that I was going to name as folks were talking about peer-led models, like our entire organization is like, our helpline is entirely peer-led, and it's something we come up against all the time, is like, how do we manage staff supports and what is possible? And then how do we manage volunteer supports? Felix, that piece about like, how do you work and live and date in a community is so real. And so the question I wanted to leave service providers a little bit with is also first adding the context that actually most intimate partner violence interventions are best done within communities. Like even to this day, even folks who are the most connected, I still get messages from friends when there is actually an issue coming up in community and someone needs support. And also, given all the complexities, we're the best suited sometimes to be able to see signs in a way that we can gently talk about. That being said, because most peer-led models are actually not in the context of an organization like Youthline. They're on the ground every day, especially during the pandemic. And so if you're a service provider and organization, instead of thinking about how you're just going to strengthen your work or your things, how are you being able to think about resources and funds to actually support those peer movements and to support those grassroots movements? Or like a question I always ask myself is like, would it be possible for other service providers to be able to provide counseling spots for my volunteers? So I don't have to keep looking for the solutions as a small nonprofit. So I also want to leave that question of like, instead of always like being like, oh, we just need to train our counselors better and whatnot. If we're agreeing that peer-led models work better, how are we strengthening those resources? And what are you doing to strengthen those resources?
That's such a great suggestion. Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, you're right. There are already so many movements on the ground and smaller groups that are needing support from mid to large scale organizations. So that's something that mid to large scale organizations, just as you said, I encourage them to look into is how do you already support what's going on in your community, which is another form of collaboration and open sharing, and taking away that agency isolation of everybody just as working on their own thing, and we don't look at what other people are doing or how we can support each other to strengthen and solidify these things.
Just thinking of the different models, right? Collaboration, and there can be an advisory role where you really have no decision-making power. And there's different models, and some are proven. There's evidence out there in the research that what preferred models are. And when you said collaboration, I started taking notes again.
Yeah.
Truly collaborative methods are found to be more useful and effective. But also too, you want to be careful you don't silo yourself in, right? Like, because you'll always be seen as a lived experience, or will you always be seen as, you know, a therapist or a manager, a counselor, where there's not a lot of space to bring in your own experience in that because you're seen as detached.
Yeah, and I think that's something I hope maybe you'll be able to get into as well during our future directions panel. Yeah, Berka, Felix, Susan, thank you so much for taking part in this discussion. I really hope people who are attending got a lot out of it. We're gonna break for a minute just as I pull up Felix's presentation on coercive feminization, but thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon.
Okay, Felix, whenever you're ready, just let me know and I will do my best over here to move through the slides.
All right, perfect. It'll be a team effort. Okay. And if I'm going too fast, because I know I tend to be like a motor mouth, just please like let me know. All right, thank you. So I'm going to do a brief introduction to coercive feminization. So next slide. So what is it? It's a term that I coined back in 2014 that speaks to the negative attitudes expressed through ongoing historical erasure, control, cultural hate, individual and state violence, and discrimination directed towards trans men, non-binary people, and non-binary people who are assigned female at birth. And the acronym is AFAB, for anyone who might not know. It is the specific intersection of misogyny and transness while also not being a woman. This phrase provides much needed addition to women and femmes, as it does not require the coercively feminized person to identify as a woman or a femme, which can be very misgendering, depending on the person's gender. So next slide. Okay, so why is this term needed? Don't we have language already? Doesn't transphobia cover it, or like transmisogyny even? No. I invite everyone listening in, I invite you to think of all of the various types of oppressions that happen to cisgender women. And content warning, I'm going to list them, so take care of yourself as you need to. There's sexual violence, there's intimate partner violence, there's stalking, street harassment, sex trafficking.
So I wonder, just for the interpretation, I wonder if I could ask you to slow it down just a little. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So there's intimate partner violence, there's stalking, there's street harassment, sex trafficking, murder, non-consensual arranged marriages, family expectations, governments attempting to control your reproductive freedoms, body shame, period poverty, fat shaming, medical discrimination, wage gaps, workplace discrimination, demands for unrecognized domestic, intellectual, and emotional labor, and so on. So the thing about this is that none of these are actually exclusive to cis women, or women at all for that matter. Non-binary and trans people who were assigned female at birth are consistently subjected to the same treatment. but it's not recognized. And why does this happen? Because we cannot see gender by looking at someone. We cannot tell their presentation or their experience by looking at them. And people don't really ask, hey, what's your gender, before just throwing oppression at you and subjecting you to that. So here are two examples, Amandala Stenberg and Lachlan Watson. Both are non-binary, both use they, them pronouns, both get aggressively misgendered in the media. Surgery and hormones aren't a part of every non-binary or trans person's journey. For some it is, for some it isn't. Both are valid. Some people believe that surgery is the end game, that it stops misgendering. Well, Lachlan had surgery. They had top surgery. Still got misgendered. It doesn't prevent, surgeries don't necessarily prevent people projecting femininity onto us. Many of us can't pass as men, or just don't want to because we're not. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So why is this term needed? Us being perceived as, or not wanting to be perceived as, men is not a reason to misgender us as women, or not passing as men, I should say. Often AFAB non-binary and trans people are viewed as women light, or just rejected from spaces altogether. And this did come up in the Toronto Shelter Network's survey. Because of this, even our claim to transness is often dismissed. The violence we face is framed as being misdirected, implying that it's less severe, denying the lived experiences of that violence not only being targeted, but often targeted in a corrective context. We don't have real statistics around this. We can't. The system is not built for that. The statistics that are gathered around violence that we face is being misgendered as violence against women. So our language and the ideas around sexualized and intimate partner violence are so gendered. Even the current SMIS intake form that a lot of shelters use, it classifies intimate partner violence and sexualized violence as VAW, violence against women. With everything being so women-centric, many gender diverse people who aren't female identified, I know that term gets thrown around a lot, can access services without being constantly misgendered, or experiencing frequent surveillance, or harsher punishments, or even refusal of services. And this was seen in the Toronto Shelter Network report that I linked in the comment section. So while services that consider AFAB non-binary and trans people are lacking, the violence isn't. Gender roles and culturally ingrained expectation of AFAB bodies and lives and socialization all deeply impact AFAB people's lives. So we're going to move on to the next slide. So again, why is this term needed? Different intersections require different language to communicate these different experiences. The current language available does not address the specific intersection of experiencing misogyny while being trans and also not being a woman. It does not address the misgendering aspects of the AFAB specific structural components. The term trans misogyny exists, but it is exclusive to trans women and AFAB non-binary people. And that's important. They need that language. It is important not to appropriate that language. At the same time, we need coercively feminized and coercive feminization to describe what's happening to us and describe that, to have representation in IPV services. So we'll move on to the next one. Wonderful. So another reason why we need this term, we're facing a continuing history of erasure. So with the patriarchal nature, with the patriarchal nature of history frequently erasing women, or rather anyone they perceive as a woman, AFAB people are being lumped in with cis women due to, I guess, similarities in physical anatomy, we're doubly erased. We're erased as women, but also we're erased because we're being misgendered as women. When forced, Western colonized history settles on crediting our existence to sexual orientation, often pointing to butch and femme lesbians, while ignoring how lesbian and sapphic communities have always included AFAB people of many genders, including trans men, non-binary people, gender non-conforming women, those without labels, those who have labels that we've lost the language for. Even people like Dr. James Berry, a surgeon who died in 1865, lived his entire life stealth as a man, only to be misgendered in death. And it was a big to-do when people, I guess the autopsy was performed on his corpse and realized, oh, we've been bamboozled. Not that being trans is a bamboozling thing, but it was a time. More recently, we can see cases like the late Stormy DeLavery, who seems to have used both he and she pronouns. Despite being credited as the person who instigated the Stonewall riots, while being accosted by the police, he called out, "Won't someone do something?" We rarely hear his name. In fact, of all the talk we hear about Stonewall and the riots and afterward, we rarely hear of we don't hear of the drag kings, and we rarely hear of the lesbians. We don't hear of the trans men who were present, and they were there, they were throwing down, leaving us to question, how many more have been erased? Who gets to be recognized as trans? The next one, please. Thank you. So, with bodies and reproductive capacities being so heavily gendered, and those which are AFAB being subjected to such heavy policing, control, and erasure, we lack information on our transmasculine and AFAB transcestors. I like that term. I discovered it like recently. It's cute. While we have some knowledge around culturally specific genders that were impacted by colonization, our knowledge is almost exclusively focused on those which seem to be aligned with trans women or trans feminine people. There's a major scarcity of knowledge around cultural genders that we would understand as being for those who were assigned female at birth. Next slide, please. So this continuing history of erasure. Trans men are less frequently acknowledged or seen in media. I know I didn't see my first trans men until I was 20. I didn't know I could be non-binary. I didn't know if that was a thing until 21. And even then it was the term genderqueer. Even though I've known that I'm not a woman or a girl since I was a very, very young child. Got into a lot of trouble. Roman Catholicism, fun times. It's not fun. So what I know is that we've always been here, fighting and building things like reproductive healthcare access, women's rights, combating gender-based violence, been involved in the slut walk, been involved in Take Back the Night, been involved in all of these movements, even fighting for legal documentation. But again and again, our labor, my labor, is claimed while our genders, my gender, is systemically written out of history. Back at the Me Too thing or rally that happened in Toronto, I spoke there, and I'm out. I'm aggressively out. I've been out aggressively out for the past like 7 years. Still misgendered, and that's what history remembers. Even now, despite trans people supposedly having rights in Ontario and Canada, the X marker is still superficial. It covers a binary gender that is retained on files. Trans people who have given birth are listed as mothers. And when we die, our death certificates are still binary. So despite surgeries, despite hormones, despite whatever loopholes we've jumped through, we are misgendered even in death. So we're going to move on to the next one. So coercive feminization is also alive within the community. Coercive feminization can look like, it can take the form of expectations of feminized labor, like cooking, cleaning, childcare, emotional labor, etc. It can look like tone policing, demanding that we be soft and non-threatening, and also then feminizing us for it. You can't win. Expecting us to like make up for the wrongs of other people. Like I can't say the amount, I can't even list the amount of transmasculine people who've been expected to make up for the crimes of cisgender men while not receiving any of the privileges because they don't pass. The expectation that we should prioritize others above our own needs always. This is a thing that's come with our socialization that I've seen time and time again. There's also the fetishization of and gendering of our bodies and bodily functions. The demands that we tolerate being misgendered to validate the sexual identities of those who are interested in us. Next page. So it can look like having people feel entitled to use us for our reproductive capacities, regardless of our relationships to that anatomy. There's a lot of trans men in all kinds of relationships who people assume that because they have a uterus, they're going to be the one carrying the kid because the other partner wants a baby. It's cringe. Even in our own experiences of violence, we are reduced to allies in order to uphold this idea that these experiences of violence belong to those who identify as women and femme. So next page, please. And we're gonna skip over this one as well because that, wait, which one is that? Okay, yeah. Oh wait, could you go back? Did I skip this one? Oh yes, we'll skip that one. So gender, we're gonna update our understanding. So to better understand the term coercively feminized, let's take a look at the concept of gender itself. Next, please. So I'm sure most of you have seen these. Some are definitely better than others, but all are still binary in some capacity, treating gender as like some linear type of thing. So me being me in 2016, I created a tool for that. Next page. So the gender layer tool. I wanted a tool that separated gender from anatomy and orientation, that allowed for culturally specific genders and varying intensities of gender, a lack of gender, and gender fluidity. Next, please. So intensity is important to capture in a tool. It's how strongly a gender resonates with you or doesn't. Yeah, and it also allows you to choose multiple things on, maybe you're like a little bit masculine, a little bit feminine, maybe you're a little bit female, but like primarily non-binary and or a demigirl. They got you. Next page. So the parts. Your gender, your presentation, and your presentation and expression and how people perceive you are all separate, but all influence your experience. So you're going to move on to the next one. So yeah, this is your gender, how you identify as you. Next. This is your presentation. And your presentation does not necessarily have to align with anyone else's understanding of gender. Perhaps you think bow ties are like hair bows are masculine, and that's how you present as masculine. That's masculine. Personally, I'm wearing lipstick, but that's androgynous to me. However, I know that me wearing makeup is not perceived as androgynous to other people because of how I was assigned and how I move through the world. And the next one. Yeah. So this is people's perception of your presentation and expression. All right. So we're going to move on. Next one. So that is what it looks like That's what it looks like all together. So you'll notice the first ring, it has man, woman, non-binary, and culturally specific gender that you can write in yourself, because there are many that can't necessarily be captured all at once. But the second one is more about presentation. So, and I left blank spaces there as well. And then the outer ring is more binary. Why? Because our Western colonized perceptions of gender are still very binary. Even when we look at someone, it's like, they're feminine, but I don't know what they are, or they're masculine, but I don't know what they are. Yeah, and there's also the option of just having no gender in the middle, because it's important to actually represent agender people, because we're often left out. So we'll move on to the next one. So the main takeaway is that everyone has a gender and a gender experience, and that even those within the same gender can look wildly, like their experiences and charts can look wildly different. So here we have 3 women. The first one is like woman, identifies as femme, is perceived as femme, easy peasy, cool. The next one identifies as a woman, maybe identifies as femme, but gets like more masculinized there. Probably gets like trouble in bathrooms despite being a cis woman. So just like that whole turf stuff, which we'll touch on in a bit, it hurts cis women too. And then this woman maybe identifies kind of as a woman, kind of fluid, but and then with fluid in the presentation, but gets like severely feminized. You can't tell someone's internal experiences by looking at them. Next page, please. And this goes for like gender diverse people, non-binary and trans people as well. Can look all kinds of ways, like how many types of like maps are there? How many people are there on the planet? Everyone has their own unique experience. Next page, please. So with both coercive feminization and coercive feminization and coercive masculinization and transmisogyny, perceived gender does not necessarily align with gender and gender expression. We're gonna move on to the next one. So I mentioned TERFs earlier. I hope you like that little graphic. So what are TERFs? TERFs are trans exclusionary radical feminists. Oh, sorry, I closed something. Not actually very radical. Their ideology has roots in racism. They believe that trans people are a threat to cisgender women and girls, and are known for spreading fear-mongering about gender diverse people in bathrooms, being predators, etc. Meanwhile, trans people are not predators any more than cisgender people are. Predators exist, most aren't. Moving on. Next page, please. So why are TERFs? Bit of comedy there. This is more complicated, but in my research, it can be boiled down to fear, defensiveness, and ignorance. Bad combination. So we have a marginalized group, being women, who are still structurally harmed by society that hates AFAB bodies, and bodies perceived feminine, and hates gender variance. They conflate AFAB bodies and the experiences of women's bodies and experiences, believing wrongly that they have ownership over those labels, possibly in part because history also conflates those labels. A lot of them view trans people as intruders, as people coming in to claim their spaces, their labels, their history, and hard work. They fear being pushed out, so they react. They entirely ignore that trans people, gender diverse people, non-binary people, two-spirit people have always been here, fighting those same fights and building those same movements, but being erased. TERFs are punching down and sideways, believing that they have to secure their safety by othering gender diverse people. But really, what they end up doing is repackaging that same misogyny they've experienced and calling it revolutionary. We can't get ahead like that. Not cis women, not trans men, not trans women, not non-binary people of any assignment, nobody. So my hope with all this is that providing this language it can invite people to have these conversations. It can invite and have non-binary people of all assignments be represented, and move away from this binary thinking of like male or female, man and woman, that everyone has to fit into those categories. So thank you for listening to this.
Thank you so much, Felix. I feel like there were some things that I knew, but I just said 2 words. But there's things that I learned in this, and I think what I'm thinking is we're gonna make sure that this is somehow uploaded to MetTrack's site, because I know a lot of people have questions and want to go back to some slides. So even though we don't have time now, we'll make sure, folks, to have this up on the site so you can view it again, and then this recording will be available as well.
And I want to just do a quick thank you to Manisha. They've brought up this really great point about like recently they were in a group of women of color, and the whole squad of TERFs started calling them backwards. And yeah, like they have a deep history in racism, like the women's lib movement, the right to vote. Like they actively fought against Black women having votes. There's a lot of like privilege and marginalization butting heads with that group, and it's an experience that I bring compassion to, but also have my feelings about.
Yeah, I think the layers of everything need to be considered more carefully, because I don't think we're in a place right now where we really do that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, like how we're finishing this up, and the last part of our symposium really today, with the kind of 5-6 minutes that we have left, I want to bring Felix and Susan forward to kind of speak for a minute or two about the future directions that we wanted to talk about. And so while we wait for Susan to get spotlit, the 2 questions that I really posed to the both of you that I hope you can speak to in the next minute is what you thought the strengths and resiliency of this project was, looking back at everything, and if organizations want to take on projects like this, what are your recommendations? So Felix, if you want to, or I don't know if you want to take a break. Susan, if you want to take a minute to go over that. And then
can we give Kate just a pause?
Yes.
So can we all just take a pause for a sec to collect our thoughts?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, a whole minute? Yeah, we ran out of time, eh? Yeah, it's okay. Just the best hits in a minute. Yeah. Oops. Ah.
Okay, yeah. So Susan, do you want to share some of your thoughts in the next minute about, I'll repeat it again, what the strengths and resiliency are that you thought related to this project, And if you have maybe one major recommendation for organizations, if they want to do something like this, what you would recommend?
Well, I made some bullet points, so it's just about greatest hits in the short time we have left. METRAC should be highly commended for achieving funding for TransFormed, for their patience with us as we went through navigated the paths of the peaks and the valleys and and all of the struggles that we went through. There are very few trans, non-binary, two-spirit groups like this that I know of, and few of them last 3 years, or even fewer last 3 years. So that aspect, I think, is an extreme positive. Where we go from here is uncertain. Pandemic does not help. It adds considerable burden to the disadvantages of our communities that were already clearly evident pre-pandemic. There are 3 models, 4 actually, were talked up about the kinds of groups. And so I just going to note them here. There are papers and research on this, and I find this a fascinating study. If I was to go back to university, I would probably write on some of this. There's the collaborative model, which works intertwining peer-led and decision-making. There's an advisory type of role, which people don't have, which I think is less effective and less important because they're advising, and the body, the governance structure may or may not take their suggestions. Then there's a consultation where you do a series of focus groups, you write a report, and then another body decides on which ones to implement. And then there's the one-off, right? Like, we're going to have a session to find out what people are thinking about topic A or topic B, and that may be a couple different groups. And so I think collaborative is really good. And then the other point I wanted to share, how are you facilitating those? So there's a peer, an example here where a member of the peer-led group became a facilitator, Maisha. And so in that regards, because you can get stuck in the lived experience and you're always seen as someone talking about your personal stuff, like how hard it is, what the struggle is, rather than being seen for, being able to do other things. So there's a shared leadership model. There's a staff managed model, and then there's a peer staffed model, which I don't know if that made any sense, but that's how I jotted it down. And so some sort of hybrid. I'd love to talk more, but I'm looking at the time and realizing we're out. But there are different ways to recruit memberships, and some rigor and thought behind how you select people is really important. So you kind of get a good fit, collaboration. And sometimes these are all like brought together so quickly like we were. And I think that was a bit of a disadvantage in our part. So then we were faced with we had these tasks to do in the first 3 months because we were behind when we got started. And you really need to do that relationship building, that trust building, and build that agreement among people before you start, okay, now we got all this work to do. So I think that's a big lesson learned. I'm going to stop there at 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Thank you for listening and letting me share.
Yeah, thank you. Felix, how about you? Do you have maybe one big strength and then one recommendation that you really want to make sure you mention before we close this off?
Okay, so I guess I'm going to start with a recommendation.
Yes.
Because it's freshest in my mind and that's how my brain works. For anyone who's interested in doing a project like this, I would really recommend doing targeted outreach to trans men. because they don't feel safe in the space. They don't access your spaces. Your spaces have historically pushed them out. And when you're doing research or doing outreach to AFAB non-binary people, keep coercive feminization in mind. Are they able to show up as their full selves, or do they have to be editing them and softening their voices and putting on like that woman performance so they can be representatives for their community? Pay attention to if two-spirit people are there, if deaf people are there, if disabled people are there. Pay attention to who is and isn't there, who shows up to the first meeting, who's not there. Do outreach. And continue to do outreach until you have that group. I would also point out that paying people for their time, and not just like, here's a honorarium of $10 for Starbucks. No. People are consultants. They are doing this consulting work for you. Treat them as such. Don't engage in that extractive thing. And Metrac was pretty good on offering, like letting us know, like, oh, these supports are available. So that's one thing I did like about this project. Yeah, and I did, there were ups and downs for sure, especially around terms of accessibility and racial inclusion, or visible racial inclusion. But yeah, I think another thing I would recommend just to all organizations is humility. All of us cause harm. There's no avoiding that. How you navigate that, I would recommend owning it. Own that, like, yes, you're causing harm. Yes, you're going to mess up. And just because you're acknowledging it doesn't mean it's solved. And acknowledge that people are going to come, that your harm impacts people that you're serving and impacts people that are working with you. And hold space for the complexities in that, and don't try to just brush it under the rug because you want to look good for your funders. Do it in a good way. Yeah, that's what I would add.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this whole project and taking this on.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah. I want to take time right now before we pull up our evaluation very briefly just to say thank you to everybody who has given so much and worked so hard on this project from year one to now. Firstly, our peer leadership group, everybody who was involved in all the stages, who gave their everything because they were so committed to helping and making sure that their experiences and resources and information would go out to the community and to service providers, to the advisory committee who provided so much of their expertise and knowledge, our partners, Public Health, City of Toronto, Department of Justice, Law Foundation of Ontario, Malud is here from the center, like all of your supports, we wouldn't be here without everybody. Like, this is how many people, this is how much time, this is what it takes to put out this work and these resources. Everybody at Metrac, Wendy, Laura, Paula, Kitty, Wendy D, everybody involved who supported us in feedback, in looking through documents and editing. Some of you were here today kind of helping us monitor things. This is the kind of community collaboration and work that it takes to, move forward and put out work like this. So, that has never left any of our minds for a second, especially this year under a pandemic. My gosh, we made it here. I'm so proud of everybody. I'm so proud of our resources and our work. And I really hope folks are going to be going on our webpage and looking through these resources, downloading them, using them. We mentioned the past 2 days, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have further questions about them or questions for any of our partners. I know there are some questions about French translations. They're coming very soon. All of that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are more than happy to answer those questions. If you're looking for any resources that we mentioned, any models, things like that, we will get that to you as best as we can. I'm going to pull up our evaluation form very quickly before I introduce Elder Blue to close off this symposium and to invite Laura as well.
So just while Maisha pulls up the evaluation, I'll just say that Paula, our transformed evaluator, couldn't be here today. So I'm on behalf of Paula, I just want to let folks know that we really need your feedback, please. So we're just going to ask that right now, folks take some time to take a minute or two to fill out this evaluation, and you can scan it with your phone if you'd like, or I've just put the link in the chat bar. In order for us to learn and continue to do better in the work that we do, we need to hear from you. So please take some time to give us your thoughts and feedback on this, on the symposium today, and on what other information you would want or need for yourself or your organizations moving forward. Just in the spirit of future directions, MetTrack hopes that we can continue to sustain TransFormed into more long-term programming. So please stay tuned, stay connected to our webpage, follow up with us so that you can hear about how we hope to continue the project moving forward. We also wanted to share that Public Health Agency of Canada has just recently put a call out for letters of intent for future projects that are building evidence-based ways of preventing and addressing violence and its health impacts. So that's also out there as well, and I can put some information in the chat about that for people. And again, I just want to take a moment to thank Maisha, our project coordinator, who I've had the privilege of working with since March. Thank you, Maisha, for your dedication, your commitment to the project. You've done an outstanding job. So thank you so much. And I just will echo all the thanks that Maisha shared. Thank you to everyone on the Peer Leadership Group for all of your expertise and your knowledge and wisdom and efforts to make today possible, and all of the resources and the webinars and everything. Thank you to the advisory committee, and thank you to all of our generous funders. And yes, thank you all to all the attendees for being here today. And we will have Elder Blue, who's going to provide a closing for us, but also we still have a webinar as well that's going to happen starting at 4:15 today that Maisha will talk about, but I'll pass it back to Maisha now.
Yeah, right before, as we're getting Elder Blue's spotlight, I just want to say we do have from 4:15 to 5:15 our final webinar on peer-led approaches. Unfortunately, at this moment, we're not going to be able to provide ASL interpretation, but since it's being recorded, post-production, we are going to be having interpretation recorded onto it. So that will be put up on our webpage for folks to view later who need that accessibility service. And I want to say before Elder Blue comes on, thank you so much to Kate, who's done an incredible job solo interpreting today. Thank you so much.
We ready? So thank you again, Maisha, and those at the Transformative Project, to MetTrack for inviting me here over this last 3 days. We started off 2 days ago by asking those ancestors that are gone on before us and those ones that are yet to come and be with us so that we could do this very important work. This work that's been a collaboration of academics, those with lived experience, those with day-to-day living learning that they've experienced, to share the words that needed to be heard amongst us all so that we could reiterate the needs of communities, to see where it is that change needs to happen, to see where it is that we need to come together and support each other more, and to really share our skills that we carry as human beings walking on our mother, the earth, in Turtle Island. Each one of us is a beautiful gift from the Creator. And we learn as we walk along our journey what it is we need to learn, and those that we need to learn from come into our path and contact with us. So we give thanks today for all those who have come into this path, this journey that we have been walking for the last 3 days, to learn from each other and to share valuable information and to really honor the way that this event has gone respectfully, with those really giving from their knowledge and their experiences to make this a better space for all those that are yet to come and all of those of us that are here. We know that intimate partner violence is something that's really prevalent in today's society. And, a lot of that is due to the breakdown of communities, the way that we no longer share and support each other in the way that we did prior to the time that we're in now, especially with COVID being here, the separation, the isolation, the non-ability to really embrace each other and support each other in that way. Learning these new formats of being, virtual and using media platforms that we never had to use before. It's not so bad. It's just taken time to get used to. And, I've heard people say they can't wait for things to go back to the way they were. And well, in a way, I don't want them to go back to the way they were. I want it to be a combination of new ways, ways that we can reach those that we couldn't reach before through these media platforms, a way that we can still sit and share a meal and share viewpoints and understandings, but to create this new way of being, this new way to speak to each other respectfully and kind, with positive intentions, with the ability to respect somebody's different opinion, but yet to still come together and be willing to work with each other. Because we know as human beings, it's a hard journey. We have learned understandings that we have picked up over our journey. And sometimes we need to put some of those down, like those rocks that we put into our backpack each day. We have to look at our backpacks constantly and see where is it that we need to take one of those rocks out of that backpack and put it down somewhere so someone else can pick that up and start carrying it. And then that will help them along their journey and making our load lighter. So I want to thank each and every person who has been a part of this symposium for the last 3 days, sharing what they know, sharing their experiences, and doing it in such a kind and gentle, compassionate way. It's been my pleasure to be with you all. And so now those ancestors, I ask you to go back to where you stay until we're ready to call on you again, until we're ready to ask for more help and more support. And remember that you are never alone in your journey. Each of us has a helper that walks with us, whether that be a relative, whether that be a spirit helper, whether that be a sacred item that we take with us, whether it be our medicine bags, but we're never really alone. The spirit of everything that the earth encompasses is with us each and every day. Even though we may feel separated and we may feel alone, we are not alone. I would remind everybody that you may have had some heavy conversations this last 3 days and you may feel a little weighted down, but I would ask you to go and lean up against one of our trees. Our trees are the source of life for us. They produce that oxygen so we can continue to live. But at the same time, those roots are intertwined with each other, with every other tree that exists. They stretch far beneath the ground into our Mother, the Earth, who takes care of us and provides for us. And if we lean up against those trees and we let go of that heaviness that we feel, that uncertainty, those anxieties, those pressures, and ask those trees to take that down deep into our Mother, the Earth, she will take those feelings away from you and send up what she does best, which is that gift of life through those trees, that ability to replenish us, renew us, and give us that strength to keep moving forward. So lean up against the tree over the next day or two and let go of those things that you no longer need to hold on to, that are not yours, and gain that life from that tree, from our Mother, the Earth, because she is there waiting for you to do that work. So Miigwech, hi, Olalan, Sego, thank you for doing this work, Metrak, and all those that participated. And it's been my honor to sit with you and to listen to the brilliance that's out there. It really warms my heart to know that our communities are moving forward with such strength and abilities in a good way. So keep up the good work. And those of you that are tired, have a rest. Those of you that are younger, help carry that load. So have a wonderful evening. Have a next good session that's coming up after 4. And until we meet again, Boma P, we never say goodbye. We say until we see each other again. Have a great afternoon and evening. Thank you.
Thank you. So with the few minutes that we have left, I will just keep a slide up for the webinar that we have at 4:15. We're going to take a break, and then when you come back, we will get started with that.